Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Clean Water webinar series. We're really excited to be able to offer these webinars to our monitors, our friends, and the clean water community as a chance to learn about clean water issues and stay connected during these strange times. I'm Rebecca Shore, the Mid-Atlantic Save Our Streams coordinator for the Isaac Walton League of America. I have a few housekeeping items to go over before I turn things over to Caroline. First off, this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on the Isaac Walton League YouTube channel soon. So you can keep an eye out on our website for information about the recording, and you'll also get information in a follow-up email of where to access those recordings. You can also explore our other webinars that we've had. We've had about 2 months of webinars, so definitely go out and check out some of those as well. Second, this webinar is interactive. So you're going to be submitting questions and responses in 2 different ways. One, you'll be using the GoToWebinar control panel, and you'll be submitting questions or responses using the questions/chat bar. Just so you know, you won't be able to see other people's chats or submissions, but we'll be able to see them and we'll be sharing them with the group. Second, Caroline's going to be using an online service where you'll be able to answer questions, and it's going to populate her PowerPoint slide as you answer. I'm going to submit the URL to that website in the chat box now, and you'll also getting some more information from Caroline about exactly how to use it. So if you have another internet browser open, that will let you be able to participate and live populate some of her slides, which will be really cool. We're going to save time for questions at the end of each section. So we'll take a pause at the end of each topic, answer some questions, and we'll also have time for questions at the end. So we expect the webinar to run about an hour, maybe a little flexibility depending on the number of questions, but we should probably be wrapping up around 1 p.m. Okay, with that, I'm going to send the URL to everyone using the chat box, and I'm going to turn things over to Caroline Donovan, who is the program manager for UMC's Ian.
Thanks, Rebecca. My name's Caroline Donovan, and hopefully you guys can hear me okay. I'm going to leave my video camera on so you can see me, but I am going to speak to the presentation, which is on another screen, and get started there. So hopefully today everyone has signed on to see a talk about effective science communication techniques. As Rebecca said, just to help this process and try to make it a little bit more interactive, we're going to do a couple different polls and a couple activities. So you will need a pen or pencil and paper just to jot down some information, and a separate browser for polling. So if you've never used menti.com, the website is menti.com, and you put in the code 214219. And so to start us off, I had started this already on the next slide, and I can see people are answering, and hopefully you guys are seeing that too. So my question is, what is your main focus of work? And this will give me an idea to see, what type of examples and what topics I can use as examples throughout my presentation. I know that you can answer, you can use multiple answers, so you don't just have to put one thing. I think you have up to 3 choices. All right, so everyone's starting to participate. Just to point out again, if you do need the code, the website and the code are at the top of each of the questions. So hopefully you can see that on the PowerPoint as well as in the chat box. All right, we've got about 22 people responding, 23, it's still going up, which is exciting. Water quality, stormwater, and education seem to be the biggest topics, so that's really interesting. I see some communication, so that's good too. I think we're all probably communicators more than we think. Awesome. Water quality is still the top there. Education, stormwater, restoration, that's really great. And obviously there's a ton more we could combine some of these things. Someone said river restoration, Some people said sustainability, biological monitoring, and so these are all kind of captured under some of these bigger topics. Maybe conservation would cover quite a bit of this, or environment would be covered quite a bit of this. So thanks, that gives me a really good idea of who's on the webinar, and what we're going to be talking about will cover a lot of these topics, so that's great. You guys can keep doing the poll. I am going to move on to the next slide. Okay, so a little bit about the group I'm with, just to give people some background. The University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science has a group called the Integration and Application Network. We call ourselves IAN. There is no guy named Ian, like when is Ian going to show up at this meeting, but IAN is a group of scientists who have also taught ourselves science communication, stakeholder engagement, and facilitation. So our group is led by Bill Dennison, Dr. Bill Dennison, seen here in this picture. He is Vice President for Science Applications at UMCS, as well as, heading up the Integration Application Network. We have a group of different level scientists. So we have science integrators. These are typically PhD level scientists doing a lot of work with synthesis assessments and integrated assessments. We have science communicators, traditionally at the master's level scientists, but some with just bachelor's. And we have an intern program, a paid intern program, which are typically undergraduate scientists who are looking for work experience and will probably go on to go to grad school in the future. And some of the really fun things we get to do are highlighted in these pictures because we work all over the world, not just in the Chesapeake. So the mission and vision of our group is always about application. So our vision is a world where science is used to make smart environmental choices. And we want to accomplish positive environmental change through scientific synthesis, engagement, and communication. And that's really what I'll be talking about today. So I did a little Googling for this because we have our version of what science communication is, but I did look up some more formal information about this. There's actually the science of science communication now. So there's, at the very beginning of this, of our group way back in 2003, 2004, science communication wasn't really like a buzzword. There might be some science communication talks, but to have a whole group of people doing science communication was more rare. And so, but nowadays there's all sorts of studies about it. There's a conference about it, everything. So Wikipedia talks about it's the practice of informing, educating, sharing wonderment, and raising awareness of science-related topics. Science communicators and audiences are ambiguously defined, and the expertise and level of science knowledge varies with each group. I think this is a really great definition. We come from all walks of life, and we get questions about audience a lot, which is really, really hard to answer sometimes. And the expertise and level of science knowledge can be very different. So some science communicators are communicators and may not have a science degree, or some scientists have just progressed through their career into science communication, and they have quite an extensive background in science. So that's a pretty good all-encompassing definition. There's also a bunch of papers out there. So there's one from Burns et al. 2003 that the use of appropriate skills, media, activities, and dialogue to produce one or more of the following personal responses to science: awareness, enjoyment, interest, opinion forming, and understanding. So we like to say that science communication helps engage an audience, engage your audience, provide them with information, and hopefully be more engaged in the future and have like a shared idea of what that science is saying. So again, fits pretty well with what we here at IAN are trying to accomplish. So I'm going to go into some overall, this is kind of like the summary slide, some effective science communication techniques, and then I'm going to focus on three things: PowerPoint presentations, data visualizations, and stakeholder engagement. It's a very, very broad overview webinar today. We actually teach classes, full-time semester long classes, as well as multi-day intensive classes on science communication. So this is really the highlight reel. So I want to first just start off with audience. We could do a whole webinar about audience, and I think, you know, the question is, who is your audience? How do you target your audience, and how do you make science communication products that are targeting your audience appropriately? This is something we really address quite differently at EN. A lot of the times we're trying to address a broad audience. It's a little bit different than what you might hear in other presentations by people like Spitfire and other groups who really target the audience, or like Compass, which is a great way to do it, especially when you're talking about policy or a specific topic. But sometimes we want to try to communicate science to a broad audience so that someone in policy can get something out of it, someone who's another scientist can get something out of it, something that your grandmother can get out of it. And so how do we kind of meld all these techniques into one document or one website or one product that could interest a large or broad audience? I'm not going to go too much more into audience, but I think it's really important to think about it and be conscious of whether or not you're targeting a broad audience or specific audiences. Effective science communication techniques should include content that's synthetic, using active titles, which I'll go into a little bit later, that it should tell a story, and that it really should be data and science driven. So the content, it needs to have data, it needs to have science, but it also needs to tell a story and be engaging. And I think the way to do that is to provide synthesis and really high level messages, rather than, you know, providing every single little bit of information in your product. Some overall science communication design techniques is to think about color, what colors are good for, what they represent to people in real life, how you can use color to enhance your content, but not distract from it. Balance and proximity are some techniques that are more used in printed products like documents. You'll see here's a page from one of our documents. And so you want to talk about how you have the balance of the text columns above this picture, that, you know, some text, this text is in proximity to this other black text, and therefore keeping those kinds of techniques in your mind when designing a document, a website, or poster at a conference. We like to try to just think overall 50% text, 50% visuals for any page. This will really help you with not writing too much. I'm just gonna say most people write too much text and hardly have any visuals, and you really wanna have about 50-50. And so if you can take that step back and really think about what you're putting on your page, you will engage more people, because some people like to look at visuals, some people like to read text, and some people like both. And so you want to provide those things for people, make sure that they're engaged in that. Another really important technique is to mock up whatever you're going to do. And we do this whether it's a conceptual diagram, whether it's a graph, whether it's a full page of something. And so mocking up something like with paper, in paper with markers or pencils, crayons if you have kids, you know, that's a really good way to start. We never really jump right into the actual software and just start using our symbols and our diagrams that we have in Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator. You know, we actually do write it out. Either we actually have worksheets that you can go through even that you can talk about what is the purpose of your diagram, what is the audience, which symbols are you going to use before even drawing it out. And this is just an example of a couple pages in a book where we mocked it up on butcher paper in a collaborative workshop scene, and then you can mock it up without even the actual visuals, but just writing the text about, oh, this photo is going to be this. There may or may not be a timeline on the page, and then you can kind of see the finished product and how it evolved over time. So don't forget to tell your story. you want to synthesize your information. And so what does that really mean? It means you want to interpret basic raw data and try to say some summary statement about it. We, Ian are very much into, assessments and saying how healthy is your river, how healthy is the bay. And so we do report card like products where it really assesses it on a good, fair, poor gradient. But really, it's just about interpreting and synthesizing your data and giving it meaning to your audience rather than just presenting raw information. So you want to visualize that information by giving it a sense of place. Who is there? What is there? Where are we talking about geographically? When are we talking about it? Is this something recent? Is it something in the past? Is it seasonal? Is it year round? You want to tell them everything about something in a picture if you can, so that you can tell them why they should care in your document. So you want to provide this sense of place and visualize it for them, so then they can get to the next step of, okay, now that I understand this thing, why should I care about it? What can I do about it? And always contextualize. We use maps a lot. We want to give people the background information that they need so they can really answer that so what question. And just to highlight a little bit of how this is done, and that we're not inventing this. It's been around for a really long time, so I'm sure a lot of people have seen this example already, but it's one of the best ones. There was a cholera outbreak in London in 1854, and Jon Snow, who was a doctor, he's not on Game of Thrones at the time, he actually mapped these little black dots on this map are actually showing the deaths by cholera. And he had a street map that he drew out, and he mapped the dots of where the people had died. And then these little P's with the circle are pump handles. And this is because back in the day, people had to walk to where the water pump was and get their water that they used for their house. And so he mapped where the pumps were, and you can see the cluster of deaths that's around this pumping station. So they took the pump handle off so that people had to go to other water pumps, and the cholera subsided. So this is just a really good example of how science communication can tell the story, can get you to not just providing raw information, but providing that overall, so what does this mean? Chesapeake Commons actually took that same map and did an updated version of it, which you see here. So I think that's also a really cool thing about science communication. It's not just in your own original data, but it's about interpreting and helping synthesize other people's information in a new and modern way. Visuals for science communication. Unfortunately, again, this is such a broad overview, but the things that we really use at Ian include conceptual diagrams. These provide context and synthesis. We have diagrams online. You can just download them and use them in your PowerPoint presentations or in your own work. So we have a lot of diagrams already out there, and we also have all the individual symbols that you can see in these diagrams that can just be used throughout any of your communication products. That's all available on our website, which is on my thank you slide. So you'll have that information. Obviously maps, geographic context and information rich. They're just like one of the greatest visuals you can use if you can do it right. And you don't necessarily need to know ArcGIS. There's lots of other tools out there like QGIS and Google Maps that you can use. Photos are always good, and we say this all the time when we do it to ourselves, where we don't take enough photos while we're working. It would be really great if we could remember to take more photos. So anytime you're outside working, anytime you're doing your methods or studying something, take pictures of what you're doing and take pictures of the world. And so these photos are just amazing ways to convey information to your audience. Video clips are always great, especially if you can use them properly in PowerPoint, which is always an issue, but obviously there's just tons of apps now where video clips can be used to provide information. Certainly if you're talking about doing social media communication products, you'll need to know how to do good videos and video clips. And tables and figures. So, I mean, scientific data is important and you can do them well and you can do them poorly. And so those tools are visuals in your communication products. So I'm going to stop there, I think, and just pause and ask people if they have any questions. Okay. I don't see any questions right now, so Rebecca, I don't know if I'm just not reading this right.
No worries, that's why I'm here. We did have one person ask a question, and I'm not sure if this is for the next section, but she wanted to ask what you meant by synthetic content.
Oh, sure. No, that's good for this. So synthetic content is about summarizing your key messages, summarizing your information into key messages. So when I say synthetic, I mean, don't just provide individual data points or individual information. You need to summarize that into a story that tells the overall picture, the overall messages. And so there are different techniques that you can use to get to your key messages, which I'll have a few examples in the PowerPoint section. But yeah, synthesis to me really means high-level summaries of information. Even if you provide that raw data, those basic data points, what is it really saying? What are you trying to tell your audience?
Great. Yeah, and that's the only question we've had so far. So definitely keep submitting those if you have them, and we'll keep pausing to answer them.
Okay, great. So we're gonna do a couple of slides about PowerPoint, and so hopefully people on their Menti browser, the menti.com site, they are seeing a new question, which is, do you practice your PowerPoint presentation before giving it? So some very broad tips for PowerPoint, and there's a lot. I could give a whole talk about this as well. So again, develop a clear story. In some ways, PowerPoint is great because it's very linear, and so you can tell a story as you're going through your PowerPoint presentation. And stories usually involve some kind of setting the scene, walking you through the problems, resolving the issue, and then coming out with lessons learned at the end. And so telling that clear story through a PowerPoint presentation is great. Always keep the whole PowerPoint to 3 to 5 key points. I think I've done that today. So I had kind of an overall summary of techniques. We have PowerPoint text techniques, data visuals, and then stakeholder engagement is last. So that's about 4 plus your start and end. Another good suggestion is 1 minute per slide. That's really hard. I think if you have a lot of information on a slide, that's fine. But don't just sit on one slide for minute after minute, and people are gonna have absorbed the information from that slide and will want to move on. Always connect your main themes to each other. Try to make a more continuous PowerPoint instead of kind of a disjointed one. Stick to the time limit. I mean, that's mostly for scientific conferences. Sometimes, you only have 12 minutes to give a talk on something you've been working on for a whole year. It just seems crazy, but it's showing respect to other people that you're staying within your time limit. And this does come back to practicing, which I'll answer. We'll talk about the results here for the Menti. So, and go full circle with your message. Whatever you started with, make sure that you come back to it. If your talk is long, if it is 45 minutes to an hour, at the end, do you want to maybe have a summary slide of what you've talked about, or wrap it back to your first original point? And always practice. So it sounds like everyone that's answered is practicing their PowerPoints ahead of time, which is great. For people that haven't answered the question yet, you can go to menti.com and use this code that you see at the top here to answer. But that's great. I mean, I feel like maybe more people wish they had more time to practice, but I just love this answer that people are really taking the time to practice and make sure that they're saying what they want to say. All right, some people are still answering. So you'll be able to continue to see that on your menti.com browser. I'm going to go on to the next slide. So one thing to talk about a little bit more is just creating a rough outline. Again, we always do drafts or mock-ups of something. There's no need to start populating your first 3 slides and then you get to the 10th slide and you've run out of time. So it's better to create a rough outline and just have like general ideas of what your PowerPoint slides are going to be about. Again, if you have about 1 minute per slide, that can give you an estimate of how many slides you'll need. If you have a 12-minute presentation, don't have 45 slides. It's going to be really hard to get through them no matter who you are, and even if you're a speed talker. So just, this is just an example of, you want to state the problem, perhaps give examples of those, how you got to your solution, the benefits that happened. Maybe you want to throw in some examples of this whole situation, and then a call to action or a recommendation. What do you want the audience to do when they're done absorbing this information? Is it a go out and clean your stream? Is it get involved with your local community, whatever it is? And so this is just one example of an outline that you could use for your PowerPoint. So active titles summarize key points. What is an active title? Well, you just got to read one. So active titles use a verb, an active verb in the sentence at the top in the title. So it is a full sentence, but they're pretty short. So try to stick to 3 to 8 words, for instance. So as an example here, we've got an inactive title that says conclusions. Well, what if someone doesn't want to read all the text or they don't want to look at the pictures? If all they have time for is to read your header, then at least they'll get something out of that, and they cannot get that from conclusions. So instead, you can say retreating marshes create seagrass habitat, but local conditions determine distribution. So if they never even look at these conceptual diagrams or want to walk themselves through it, they know that retreating marshes create seagrass habitat. So this is a combined active title, but you can see how it might help someone if they're clicking through your PowerPoint slide after the fact, or they are looking at a poster in a conference and they're just kind of scanning the headlines, that they're going to be able to walk away with something from your presentation. So active titles summarize key points is an active title. And what I have here is an example that we would like for you guys to just jot down what you think the title of this slide should be. So the actual slide shows 2 graphs, and one is how likely residents are to plant a rain garden and how likely they would be to plant a rain garden if they had financial help. And what we want you guys to do is write down an active title using an active verb, pretty short, about 5 to 8 words, that would help understand this graph. If the audience really doesn't want to absorb this information, how would you be able to get them to understand by using an active title? And yes, you can submit your answers in the chat box, and I can read off some of the examples.
Yeah, so as Caroline said, just use that little questions box, and yeah, we see some are coming in. Caroline, are you able to see those, or would you like me to read them aloud?
Yeah, I don't know how to expand the box. I can see people write them, but I can't actually see them all in a row. Let's see.
There should be a little square with an arrow icon, and that pops it out.
Yeah, okay. Let's see, we have answers might be, a title might be, people are unlikely to plant a rain garden. Residents are more likely to plant a rain garden with financial help. We've got one, financial help matters, exclamation point. I do like exclamation points in my titles. It does seem to kind of provide some emotion there. More than half of respondents are unlikely to plant a rain garden. That's a nice, good technical one. Financial help increases likelihood of planting a rain garden. That's exactly the type of thing that we're looking for. So, you know, a subject, an active verb, and the answer. So we've got a lot of the same types of answers. Financial help increases the likelihood. Financial help increases likelihood. Compare how financial resources affect planting of rain gardens. Incentivize rain gardens by providing financial assistance. That's definitely, I have not seen that kind of answer before. That's a really good point. It's like, it's as if your audience, you're trying to teach your audience what they can do to help people. I really like that a lot, rather than just summarizing the graphs. So yeah, these are all great. Rain gardens need more funding. Yep, and so these are really good examples of what you can use. We've gotten some really good ones. We've gotten some really cheeky ones in the past, something like more money equals more rain gardens, or what's another one? Just something where it's like you can use an equal sign, like more money equals more gardens, things like that. So something to keep that title interesting to your audience is what you're going for, and always using that active title of increases or helps. These kinds of verbs are what you're looking for when you think about active titles. All right, does anybody have any questions about that activity? I encourage you to use active titles in any of your PowerPoint presentations. Any of your, even the subject line of your emails would be, you know, something you could use that people will want to click on your email.
Yeah, we did have one question of someone asking about being careful about implying cause and effect in a title if it might be more of a correlation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in this case, let me go back to my slide. In this case, it was a survey of respondents, and so it did seem like people were more likely to plant a rain garden. So it was really about the likelihood. So you're right, we have to be careful to say the likelihood of planting a rain garden is higher with financial help, rather than saying you will plant more rain gardens with more help, with more financial help. So.
Great. And we had a question from Jim. Does having the title be a question? Is that a good technique?
Yeah, it definitely works. I think if you, as long as you answer the question in your slide, you can have the question be the title. So again, someone might, if they only read the title, they might get curious and then want to absorb what the information is on the slide. But if someone's really just looking for the answer right away, that's when the title can really help. So I think question marks can be effective, but they are not providing the same information as like a results statement. Good questions. I am seeing all of them now. Sorry about that, Rebecca.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah. Yes, now some people are critiquing these graphs, which I really appreciate from a scientific point of view. That wasn't necessarily the point of this example, but I appreciate that people are critically looking at the graphs and the information in the graphs. So another thing to think about, I had mentioned color before, and so using color carefully, especially red and green, when it comes to color blindness, it should be a consideration. We could talk a lot about that itself, but at least contrasting between the background and the text or graphic is important. So in my presentation, I'm using a dark background with very light text. It is more common to have a light background with dark text, kind of like a book. People are used to writing on light backgrounds like paper with dark ink. And so that actually is more, people prefer that. So I'm kind of going against the grain in the sense of using a darker background with light text. With PowerPoint, it's nice because you're not using a lot of ink either. So you can kind of use a lot more like richer colors in PowerPoint and not have to worry about like, can your printer, support you using pages and pages of blue ink. So here's some just examples, you know, a lighter blue with a dark brown text, or a light green with dark green, and obviously black and white as the classic. So you want to use a consistent color palette. You know, try to keep your slides looking the same with the same color schemes, and then use those color schemes in your figures. So here's an example of how color can be used, not only in multiple ways, honestly. So if you're using blue as your background in a PowerPoint presentation, you should think about how your visuals could use that color blue or the tones of that blue. In this case, this graph is actually using blue within the figure as well to indicate temperature. So as the temperature gets colder, you get a darker blue, which, you know, it helps to see as people are kind of going through this experiment, they're using color to emphasize the colder temperatures. So just using those types of color techniques throughout your presentation or in any communication product is a good idea. All right, so I'm just going to pause there. I think there's more questions coming in. I've heard it's better to use a dark background when presenting in a very large room as opposed to a smaller room. Have you heard similar? I do, you know, I feel like there's never one right answer, of course, but I will say that if you are going to a conference and the screen is really dark and the room is really dark, I may need an extra cup of coffee to stay awake. So I would be, I understand that, like, it's, instead of it being really glary, like if you have a really light background and it's like, oh gosh, I can't look at it, it's so bright. I worry about having a dark background in a dark room and therefore people like losing focus. So I think there's pros and cons of that. I mean, if you're giving a presentation and you're the only one giving a presentation all day, then you do that. But I worry about back-to-back presentations of people being, you know, whew, I'm tired and it's dark in this room, I'm going to close my eyes for a minute. All right. I think colors matter. I think they matter in PowerPoint. I think they matter in any communication product. All right, so we're going to talk very briefly again about data visualizations. So visualizations should be compelling. I did touch briefly on conceptual diagrams, but there are many other types of visualizations out there that aren't diagrams. So here's an example of information and data within a visual that will help connect the audience to why it matters. So this is an example of how sea level trends will occur in at Ocean City, Maryland, and combining it with someone who's on their dock, possibly fishing for crabs, helps people get that context. You are providing them information, but you're also kind of bringing it back to their regular life. So the visual should be compelling and something that people really want to think about more. And they should also be informative. I'm not saying anyone's going to be able to like design this wonderful graphic after my talk, but you know, these are some of the types of information where visuals can be beautiful and they can be powerful and they can provide a ton of information. And so this is a circular figure showing for the Northeast and Midwest seasonal patterns. And this was actually in how it was in an eco drought newsletter, and how shifted seasons will, you know, happen because of increasing temperature and precipitation changes, particularly in this case, drought. And so you've got this interior circle providing the different seasons. You've got the growing seasons here with different color trees. You can talk about flows as well, and when it'll be snowing versus when it'll be raining. And then this pink color is trying to show that shift in these regular seasons. So there's a lot of information here. You would probably need some text narrative to describe the figure if this was particularly in a newsletter. So if this was being used in a PowerPoint, you might have some bulleted points right next to it, as well as an active title to make sure that people got the message. So graphs are visuals, and so I just want to walk through some basic ways that we can improve our graphs. So graphing data is probably the easiest way to visualize your data. You don't need to make, you know, complex visuals if that's not your thing. And you want to see the relationships between the different measurements in the data. Hopefully it helps to identify if there are outliers, and visualize and identify trends is another reason why people graph data. So here is an example of a very, very basic bar graph that may or may not come out of Excel. I know Excel has gotten a lot better these days, and also people are using R a lot to make their graphs. But you can see there's a lot going on. There's different colors. There's some like background information that probably doesn't need to be there. The title is experimental results, which really doesn't really help you very much. And the axes are not labeled with units. So instead, what we've done here is we've taken away a lot of the background information that wasn't needed. We've clarified the locations for each of these, as well as added units to the y-axes. And then you have your legend up here where the control and then plus each of the treatments. And we've, again, used a color gradient to try to emphasize the fact that like the control doesn't have any treatments. And as you add treatments, the color gets darker. And this was actually a graph about grassolaria, which is a macroalgae in the coastal bays of Maryland. And so it happens to be red. And so we used the color of the macroalgae as part of the graph. So this is just a way to take a graph that the data is there, but this is helping to inform and provide more information and maybe let people absorb this information clear, easier. So you're always wanting to get your audience to absorb more information easier. So here's an example of a pie chart. This is a pie chart. It's 3D, probably doesn't need to be 3D, and it just has a variety of colors for each of the types of land use. Well, you can change this, and it's just 2D, that's all you really need, and it uses color gradients to kind of group the different land use together. So you've got water and wetlands over here, and you've labeled each one of those, but you're using colors of water for the water land use types. Same with the forest. So natural, terrestrial are all grouped as, greens and even into browns. And then you've got developed over here in red. So using these kind of color schemes to help provide information about the data is really useful, and it at least helps you see some information on this pie chart. But let's also think about what we're trying to convey, what information we're trying to convey. Is this showing that shrubland is the largest land use? Probably. Are we saying that maybe wetlands and herbaceous wetlands are next? Probably. So maybe a pie chart isn't actually what you want to use here. Instead, you don't even need to use colors. You're trying to show land use by area in a ranked graph so that you can see, okay, yes, shrubland is the highest % of land use, and then woody wetlands, and then herbaceous wetlands. So really think about your data and the message that you're trying to convey through that data, and pick the right type of graph or data visualization for that information. I guess I'll pause there and just ask any questions about basic data visualization. I feel like I'm rolling through this so quickly, but we have a ton of informational material online, as well as, like I said, we actually do teach these courses over longer time frames. Okay, so there's a question, curious about tools for those of us who aren't graphic designers when creating visuals and images. I wouldn't even know where to start, especially with a small budget. So there are a lot of, I think Excel has gotten a lot better. You could probably make any of these types of things in Excel. So the color schemes are better, the fonts are better, it's easier to put together some different graphics. I think that there are free apps online. So there's different free graphic design type apps where you don't need an account, or you don't have to download the software. You just go into the artboard and you can put in your graph and make it how you want. And then you export it from there as an image file. So I think I'm trying to think of the names of these websites, but you can just Google it. But I think Vectio is one of them. Grava might be the other one. So, you get that kind of, idea about, there's lots of online tools that are free. One of the other things that we have is our symbol library and our conceptual diagrams that are free, as well as photos. So there's folks out like us in the Integration Application Network that provides this information for free to kind of enhance your design. So even if you have a graph and you make it in Excel and you put it into PowerPoint, You can then insert, individual symbols that highlight what you're talking about, or you can put a little picture together that goes with your graph. There's a comment about the graph not ending up at 100%. I will find out how to make that better. Maybe that's just probably, an example graph. So thank you. Someone said Pixel and Inkscape are two. Inkscape is a really good example of an online free software. I do think you have to download it and use it on your desktop. I'm not really sure, but there are other ones that you just go to the website and you can make stuff on there. But Inkscape it's nice and powerful, so that's a good one to use. Canva, that's the one I was trying to think of. I'm like, Canva. So for environmental topics, are there good free video clip sources? Well, I'll just put a plug, at least for I know the Chesapeake Bay program has been doing a great job of providing photos and video clips about Chesapeake Bay environmental topics. So there should be like partner organizations out there, like Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, Isaac Walton Lake, obviously, the Chesapeake Bay program that, they usually have something available on either their websites or on their, wherever they host their video clips. And you just have to make sure that you give credit and provide the source data. We have a video library ourselves. So our video library, again, you can find it from our website, but it's on Vimeo and YouTube. So I'm just going to switch gears a little bit, because as we walked through this science communication process at EN over the last 16 years, we really kind of transitioned into doing more stakeholder workshops. And so I'm just briefly going to talk about this. I know I'm very conscious of the time. So some effective stakeholder engagement techniques. One of the most important things is to co-design any project, workshop, or meeting. So co-design with the stakeholders is truly the way to move forward these days with any kind of project. So you bring those regional stakeholders together to create a shared vision. So building a shared understanding of what's going on, as well as designing the strategies that you're going to use to move forward. Instead of, as an example, what not to do maybe is like sitting with your colleagues and figuring out a plan for restoration and then presenting it to citizens or presenting it to restoration, people. So it's, you want to bring everyone to the table at the very beginning. So it's a co-design process, and everybody feels that they're involved and that they actually are sharing in building something in their community. Some of the other tools that we use are more like activities or games. So Snap, which I'll go through. We have Get the Grade, is a board game, which is super fun to play. It's about stakeholder engagement and collaboration in a watershed, and you get to play like a different part, like I'll be a logger today, or I'll get to be the economist or something like that. It's a really fun tool to use. Stakeholder mapping and stakeholder network analysis, and I'll give an example of that. But the stakeholder mapping should happen during the planning process so that you have the right stakeholders at the table. And other tools that you can use are storyboarding together in that co-design process, and using polls, as I've done during this. I'm engaging you guys, your stakeholders and participants, and one of the best ways to do that, especially in this virtual world, is to use polls. So Snap is an activity created by WWF. And you can use it in a variety of situations. And so you ask your stakeholder in a workshop, you ask the stakeholders a question. So it can say, what do you value about your home? And then you have 3 sticky notes that you can have up to 3 answers per person. If you have a lot of people in the audience, you might want to limit everyone to 2 answers. And the idea is to really write down 1 or 2 words. I value peace and quiet. I value lots of light in my home. You know what I mean? So it would be really short things. Light, lots of light in my room, sunlight, or peace. So very short answers on these sticky notes. And then you get everybody to stand up and talk around. You can see in this picture, everyone's got their stickies in their hands. and you have someone facilitate it, and you ask someone, okay, what's your thing? And I said peace. And so someone else will snap to my answer. So if they feel the same way or similar, it would snap on mine. And then you would group these things into broader categories. So someone over here, like this is an example from the Chesapeake Bay report card, but people would say something like, what do I value about the Chesapeake? They value clean water, and someone else said no nutrients, and someone has said low pollution, and all those things are kind of underneath the same category of like clean water or water quality. And so you would group these under broader topics. So it's a fun activity to do. We do it for fun, like with funny questions too, like what's your favorite movie category or something like that. Stakeholder mapping, I'm just going to briefly talk about this, but stakeholder mapping is about determining what stakeholders you need to be at the table and to identify the gaps, like who do we not have at the table and what are we missing? And it's a really great way to think about who has the influence over decision making or the direct impact, who's using the results of this information. All those people should be at the table. And we do this really interesting power mapping, you could call it. And so the idea is you have interest on the x-axis, and as interest increases, you go along this axis. But you also have influence. So who has low influence, and as you go up, who has more influence. And you divide it into 4 ways, and you talk about who might have a lot of influence but low interest in your topic. Who has a lot of interest but maybe low influence would be down over here. But you want to make sure that they all kind of come to the table and maybe move these people that have high interest into the high influence category. You move the people from high influence into that have low interest into the high interest sector. So these are ways that you can articulate how the stakeholders are interacting during your project. This little graphic here is about stakeholder network analysis. I'm just gonna leave it at that. I'm kind of running out of time, so I just wanna make sure that stakeholder network analysis is a really good, useful tool. It doesn't require some knowledge of the software and figuring that out in itself, but it's a great way to help with stakeholder engagement and make sure that your project is connected and has a shared vision from lots of different people. Okay, so one last question about stakeholders. So what activities do you like to participate in at meetings and workshops? This is going to help me, of course, make sure my workshops go better, but also can maybe help each other figure out what types of things, what types of activities you like to participate in meetings. Do you like to just sit there and listen to presentations? That's okay. Or do you want to do something like play Snap so that you can get up out of your chair and interact with your other participants? You should be able to just enter this, and as people enter and answer their questions, it'll start a scrolling wheel. So as more people answer, more answers will come up. Great, we're also getting some answers in the chat. So someone said they would like to play Snap. They'd like to break up into groups to discuss specific actions or scenarios. So yes, small group activities within a larger workshop are really useful. Other people said polls are good, conversations with a goal towards producing a useful product and sharing back to the group. That's a really good point. Some of the best ways to structure our workshop is to have a product come out of that workshop. So structuring the workshop around that product is actually really, really useful so that the product is helping the process move forward. So you can see here what everyone's writing about. I appreciate small group activities, any activities involving movement or props, hands-on activities. We do a ton of hands-on activities in our workshops. Role playing is a good example of the get the grade game where you have different stakeholders and you get to play a stakeholder that you might not normally play in your regular work life. some people like to watch and take notes. So that's good. Like large plenary group discussion does work, and it is good. Well, there's lots of good examples in here. So chance to interact with those with similar situations and goals. It's fun when the activity moves you around the room and people's configurations change. So these are all really good tips. So I think overall what we're saying is that really be conscious of how you're designing your workshops, so that there's different activities, different sections, so that it's not just one long meeting of a plenary, but providing different options for different people who have different preferences is a good way so that everyone is getting something out of your workshop. So I'll let that scroll there. It should be, see if I can. Hopefully you guys are still seeing it when I go to the next slide. Oops. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. You guys should keep answering. I can provide these results actually summarized after the meeting. So I just wanted to quickly say thank you very much. My information is on this slide. We have a new website. So on our old website, we'll direct to this website at some point, but umcs.edu/IAN. It's our new website. It has all the same information as our old site, but we are populating it with new materials. So just if you have any questions about that, just feel free to get in touch with me and I can point you in the right direction. There's tons of websites out there. I wanted to point out some design trends for 2020 that I thought this was really interesting about top 10 presentation design trends. Our blog is a great resource for information. So we provide a lot of this information via blogs on our website. We also, because we have a science visualization class, they provide blogs on each of the topics in our classes. So you can read more in depth about, presentation techniques, or how to take good photos, or how to take good video clips, things like that on the blog. And we have produced some publications about stakeholder engagement specifically. So that's an ever evolving process of ours. We're currently working on a book on stakeholder engagement, but we do have some publications already out there. I know I'm right up against one, so I'm happy to stick around, but I do want to answer some questions if people have more questions. There is a question, how does Menti work and is it free? So Mentimeter.com. So go to Mentimeter.com. You can sign up with an account. Of course, the free account gets you certain amount of information, and then as you pay, you get more from it. So I actually embedded my Mentimeter polls in my PowerPoint. So Microsoft PowerPoint software has an add-in that allows you to add your Mentimeter polls directly into PowerPoint. But on Mentimeter.com, you can actually just, I could have presented this whole thing on Mentimeter.com in a presentation slide format. So there's varying levels of cost, I believe, but there should be a free version. I will also note that most online webinar software like GoToMeeting and Zoom and stuff has embedded polling. So I could have easily just used the embedded polling option in the webinar software rather than in my PowerPoint presentation. So there's several different ways to slice it. Yes, I will go back to the slide. I was giving an example of how you might want to outline your PowerPoint presentation or any product really. And I used this example of, there we go. When you want to tell a story, you usually start off with like, okay, here's the issue and here's the characters, and give examples of that problem, and then move on to how you solved your problem, and kind of end with a call to action. This is just one example of how you might want to give an outline to your presentation. Someone wants to know if they will have the PowerPoint as a reference after the fact. I can leave that up to you, Rebecca. My PowerPoint presentation, I can totally give it to you guys as a PDF at any time.
Yeah, certainly. We can be sure to get that out to you. We will also have a follow-up email with information about the recording as well. So this webinar was recorded. I know a few folks were asking about. We did have a question a little further up about what are your suggestions for how to indicate the source of data on a figure itself? So is it just, you know, line text citing your sources, or what's the best practice for that?
Right, so I think if you need to give a photo credit, so if it's a photo and there's a photo credit, that's usually suggested either on whatever website you got the photo from, like Flickr or whatever. So you want to give a photo credit that's probably someone's name or the name plus like an organization. If you're providing data information, I would do the source, like the full URL if you can. And then on the slides as like, you know, almost like a footer. But then I do like the idea of like an acknowledgement slide that has like almost like 4 more information. So like listing out the URLs that you've gotten the information from, your contact information. So I think it's a variety, and it should fairly, you know, it should be throughout your presentation and be fairly extensive in the end. If you're thinking about a literature cited type of thing where it's, you know, you're wanting to actually cite literature in a bibliography kind of way, I would wait and put that all at the end. It will be distracting if you try to talk too much about your sources or references throughout your presentation.
We also had a question someone submitted in via email that was about a specific audience being communicating with agriculture practitioners, but do you have any suggested activities or resources for if you're trying to target a particular audience, especially if it's not maybe one you're as familiar with?
Yeah, so I'm totally just punting this to other people. I think that there are other groups that do a really good job of audience identification and messaging. And so there's Compass has a message box that they use. That's really, really useful, I think, when you're trying to target a specific audience. Spitfire is another communications group that I've worked, you know, I've seen their work, and they have some audience tools as well. So we, Ian, don't have specific audience tools, but I think the Compass message box is like a pretty good example of one that's fairly well used around the environmental community.
Okay, great. And I think I found the URL for that, so I'll share that in the chat box as well.
Yeah, hopefully that person is still on the webinar, by the way. I can also follow up via email if that's helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can pass along her info. Yeah, so if anyone has, we'll spend a couple more minutes, maybe if folks have other questions. In the meantime, if you're still typing those up, I just want to remind everyone this webinar was recorded. It'll be available on the Isaac Walton League YouTube channel, where you can actually find our past webinars as well. And we are currently putting together our June webinar series. So we're not going to have a webinar next week, but we do have some in the works already for June, including topics like wastewater management, the value of citizen science data, and some other topics. So if you have any other questions, please send those in. We'll wait for another minute or two. And otherwise, we'll hope to see you at our next webinars. I was going to ask Caroline for my own self-interest. With the PowerPoint add-ons for Menti, is that something, so you have to download that Microsoft Online, or?
No, I thought I did. I did think I had to do that too, actually. I was like, all prepared. Let me see if I can get my PowerPoint up. So are you the like regular PowerPoint, not the slides show? Mm-hmm. So right under, oopsies, right under insert, there's get add-ons and my add-ons. So first you get it, so you can get add-ons, and then once you have it, it just appears in your PowerPoint. So I didn't have to upload anything separately. I just had to go here and like search for it.
Okay.
Yeah, that was very helpful. something I did not know about until recently.
Yeah, that was amazing to watch. Okay, well, it seems like we are set for questions, so we'll let you go, Caroline. But thank you so much. This was really great. People were very excited, and if folks have further questions, they can email us at sos@iwla.org, or we'll pass your emails on to Caroline. And otherwise, we'll hope to see all of you in person someday soon.
Yes, thank you. And I do want to just say thanks to Rebecca for inviting me to do the webinar. And there's so many more tools and resources out there. So if there's anybody that wants to follow up about, data visualizations, PowerPoint, stakeholder engagement, there's plenty more to talk about after this very broad overview.
Great, perfect. All right, well, thanks everyone, and have a good rest of your day.